Good evening, everyone. My name is David Grosky, and I will be moderating this evening. Very pleased and proud to do so once again. This is our third session of the 2024 legal panel. And as I always do, I'd like to begin this evening with my Devar Torah, which tonight will focus on actually what was the parsha 2 weeks ago in discussing with Rabbi Shimon a concept that's very near and dear to me, which is the concept of gratitude and the importance of living with gratitude if we want to be living a positive as opposed to a negative life. I've read in many instances that if we live with gratitude most of our days, it's nearly impossible to be negative. And I think that concept does ring true, at least for me. I would urge you all, if you ever have a moment, to Google search Steve Jobs and the amazing writing that he did right before his death many years ago. He was the Apple founder who was stricken with pancreatic cancer, seemingly had everything in life, but he didn't have his health. And he wrote an incredible piece on the concept of gratitude. And I don't know that I've ever read a more moving piece on that concept, but I want to say to you that many of you who've been with us for years know about my background and some of the travails I've been through in my life. And I and all of us have a choice whether we're going to focus on the positive going forward and that which is most dear and near to us and positive, such as our family, the love we have of our family members, our health, etc., and as opposed to any negative aspects in our lives, because living in gratitude, as I say, is a way to avoid depression, anxiety, and living in the negative moments. So I urge all of us to continue with that idea in mind and trying to focus upon that which we could be grateful for, which includes, of course, waking up every day in the morning. With that, I'd like to introduce very proudly our guest speaker this evening, Harold Hirshman. Harold is a senior litigator at Denton's law firm in Chicago, is a member of the litigation and dispute resolution practice there, and has been a trial lawyer for more than 49 years. He has tried bench and jury trials and arbitrations in Illinois, Delaware, Washington, California, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Texas, Connecticut, New York, Maryland, and Florida, among other jurisdictions. His trial experience runs the gamut from serving as one of the plaintiff's counsels in SCM Corporation versus Xerox, the longest antitrust jury trial on record, to helping a family protect its ailing grandmother from a predatory caregiver. His principal areas of focus have been securities class actions, takeover battles, business partner disputes, lender liability claims, and accounting malpractice suits. Harold has also briefed and argued before the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th and 3rd Circuits and the Illinois appellate courts, including the state Supreme Court. In addition, he's received more than 450 cases through mediation, resolved, I should say, more than 450 cases through mediation. And with that, I'm very proud and honored to present Harold, who we hope will speak with us this evening as one of the first of many in the future for HINDA. The HINDA Institute. Thank you, Harold, and welcome.
Thank you, David. You know, you started by talking about the parsha from a couple of weeks ago, and my brother always said to me, my brother Avishom, whenever you have to say something, just look at the parsha, because there'll be something in there that's useful to you. And so I did look at the parsha for this week, but unfortunately, the line that drew me closest was from Shoftim from a few weeks ago, talking about appointing judges who do mishpat tzedek, who do a just decision-making process. And unfortunately, I can't really say that what I have seen in the prison system constitutes a mishpat tzedek. And you were very kind to talk about my commercial background and the litigation I've done for pay. But I've also been a pro bono lawyer really my entire career. And since the middle 2000s, most of what I do on the in the pro bono area has to do with prisons and prison health and mental health. I also do represent some individual prisoners, and their cases tend to be about the failure of healthcare for them. I didn't really start thinking about or paying attention to the dilemma that is posed for the state when it incarcerates the number of people it does. What struck me a long time ago when I first started this was I asked myself, well, how many prisoners are there today? So you look back in the late 2010, about the system had about 50,000 prisoners. But in 1970, so that would be 40 years before, there were only 7,000 prisoners in the Illinois prison system. So we had a system that went from what I would call a modest population to a ever expanding population. Now, fortunately, the population has gone down in the last decade, approximately a decade. So that today we only have 29,000 prisoners. But even that is an incredible multiple, 4 times what was extant in 1970. So if you were looking at the prison system, you would say, well, what happened? How did it happen? And, there's lots of explanation for the expansion of the system. But what didn't happen was 2 things. One, the system significantly failed to maintain the quality of its infrastructure. And there was just a report to the governor last year from CGL, and they pointed out that there was about $2.5 billion in infrastructure improvement that was necessary because of deferred maintenance. Now, what is even more important in my view than the incredible number, it is where the deferred maintenance was and what those facilities are. For instance, Pontiac had 235 million in deferred maintenance. What is Pontiac? Well, among other things, it was selected as a place to treat mental health. And then we have Dixon, which is 3 things in the system. It's functionally an old home. It is also a central facility for the treatment of mental illness, and a central treatment for a central place for physical illness. Stateville itself needed $286 million in deferred maintenance. And the governor decided that the best thing to do was to close Stateville. This came on the heels of the closure of F House, which was at Stateville, which was the last functioning roundhouse prison in the country. And if you had ever had the well, I wouldn't call it a pleasure, but if you'd ever been to F House, it was an astonishing sight because you could see the birds flying around because they hadn't repaired the broken windows. It was unbelievably loud because every cell turned inside on a core. And so anybody who walked into F house could be seen in every cell. So the cacophony of prisoner voices was astonishing. In addition, the lights were on 24 hours a day so that the guards at the center could watch what was going on in the tiered cells. So the physical plant is terrible, but what about healthcare and mental health care? Frankly, I knew extremely little about that. Starting in 2007, I began to learn more, especially about mental health care. I've written an article on the first 12 years of a case called Rasho, which was a class action lawsuit brought by a prisoner taken over because the court did not want to have a class action on the quality of mental health care run by an individual prisoner. And so a consortium of lawyers formed to work on that lawsuit. And I'll spend a bit of time on that. And what I learned was that in a system with 50,000 prisoners, there were approximately 95 mental health care workers. Now, if you think about that in terms of the numbers of people who need mental health care in the prisons, one of the things that is a sort of commonplace about the US prison system and the Illinois prison system, Cook County Jail, is that it is considered to be the Illinois prison system, the jail here in Cook County, are considered to be the largest mental health facilities in the state. And they are. So the department itself, pretty much from 2010 on, has said they have about 13,000 mentally ill prisoners, of whom 4,000 they classify as seriously mentally ill. So those 95 workers don't go very far if you think about spreading their yearly hours over a population as large as existed. And so one of the first things we did in Rasho was we thought, look, this can't be a system that the state wants. And we should be able to work out a settlement where enough resources are brought to bear so that mental health can be provided. And it seemed as though the state was interested in that. And so we entered into a stay of that lawsuit, and we hired a guy named Fred Cohn, who was a recognized legal and mental health expert, to do a study to see what he suggested be done. And Fred came back, shared his insights with us. His basic proposition was that Illinois was delivering mental health care at the same level as Alabama was delivering mental health care to its prison population. That is to say, we were among the worst states in the country. And his prescription was pretty straightforward. It was hire another 300 or 400 people to treat the mental health population. It was to create a sense of programming as opposed to a sort of catch as catch can system where the programming that would be given to the prisoners had been scientifically validated as useful. Again, it doesn't sound like a particularly shocking proposition. The governor fired the director of prisons who had been working with us because that was an early attempt to let out people, and one of the people they let out, unfortunately, committed a horrendous crime. I don't remember what it was, but the governor was running for, Pat Quinn was running for re-election, and as you could imagine, that became an issue in the campaign. So the prison director of the IDOC was resigned. And in the lawsuit, we continued, we thought, on a course of resolution. The principal proposition for us was not as lawyers to tell the professionals what they needed, but to have them use the data that Cohn and his team had put together to set for themselves goals that they believe they could meet, both in terms of number of mental health beds, number of mental health professionals, and where in the system they would place units that specialized in mental health. I'll get to physical health in a minute. They concluded that they would use as focal points Logan, the women's prison, which has $116 million of deferred maintenance, Pontiac, and they would create two new spaces. And one of them would be a hospital because there was no hospitalization ability in the system. And one would be a special mental health facility in Joliet for seriously mentally ill prisoners. You would think with a blueprint from a set of experts and with what seemed to be originally a willingness to reach a conclusion, we would have had a relatively simple time of resolving the problem. Unfortunately, as the governors changed, as the directors changed, the attitude towards what a settlement was changed as well, and whether that settlement would be enforceable in court. We, of course, believed that a settlement without an enforcement mechanism was just words, and it wasn't going to really be beneficial to our mentally ill prisoner clients. And so settlement negotiations seem to be at a place where we were close to an agreement, and Judge Mim in the Central District called us in 2014, and we sat in his chambers and we hammered out the last points. And then in the afternoon of the second day, he came into our room and he said, "I've got bad news for you." "Yes, Judge, what's the bad news?" He said, "Well, we've been working on a settlement that has specific numbers and that has general propositions." And I said, "Yes, that was exactly what the Attorney General said she wanted." And he said, "Well, the bad news is she doesn't want it anymore. And they aren't going to sign a settlement like that, period. And you're going to have to go back to negotiations." he said, but they're acting in good faith. And I said, we need to talk. And on this case, I worked with Equip for Equality and the Uptown People's Law Center. And we talked for a few minutes and I said, let's get the judge back. I've got an idea. And that was, okay, we'll continue to negotiate, but there's got to be a monitor. There's got to be somebody who goes into the system, who continues to report on whether it is providing adequate care. They agreed to that. And so we had our first monitor after Fred. And lo and behold, the monitor would talk on a monthly basis with us and with the prison system. And he kept saying, you know, it isn't changing. They're not hiring enough people. The facilities are run down. There's no place to have one-on-one conversations with the mentally ill, talking to them at cell phone through the bars, with all of them having cellmates, is not a way to engender a therapeutic relationship with anybody. A therapeutic relationship, as we all know, involves privacy and an ability to lay out your soul, which isn't easy for anybody. It is certainly not easy screaming through a cell door, a steel cell door, someone who you may never have seen before. So that was the state of care. And the discussions broke down further and we agreed to litigate. We said, look, this isn't going to work. And we were due to go to trial in January of 2017. And the state asked to settle the case in December of 2016. And we thought, okay, we now have their idea of where they're going to put these new facilities, their idea of how many people, how many beds, and so forth. And we signed the agreement in, and it was approved by the court. But soon, and there was a new monitor, Pablo Stewart. And as he went around, he was reporting the same thing that we had heard. And at this point, for almost, they weren't doing what they had promised. And consequently, the care was not improving. And this is the month of Elul, and we're supposed to be able to forgive. And I, in my heart, to forgive the people in the system, in the prison system, who have said time and again that they wanted to change. And when the time came to change, the change didn't occur. We got an order from the federal judge saying, you know, you've got to do more for people on crisis watch than simply strip them naked and put them in a cell where they couldn't harm themselves. That's not care for someone in a crisis. And you've got to, you know, hire more people and so on. We went up to the Court of Appeals, and after sitting on the case for 2.5 years, they reversed the trial court. And they said, oh, the state is doing things. And you can't say they're not trying. For instance, they pointed to a brand new hospital that was going up in Joliet that was supposed to be a state-of-the-art facility. And they were almost completed building it. The state-of-the-art facility was supposed to house 150 mentally ill people in need of intensive care. The facility opened in 2020, I believe, and it had 150 beds, but it didn't have the staff to provide care to 150 beds. And to date, in this brand new magnificent facility, they treat 30 or fewer people. So while the deferred maintenance is a serious issue, even when they have a brand new building, the care is not being given. And why is that? Well, first of all, the state doesn't have its own people in general providing the care. They have over the last 17 years contracted with something called Wexford, a for-profit hospital corporation. If you think about that for a minute, when the state signs a $2 billion contract with Wexford, Wexford immediately pockets 10%, $200 million. So that means $200 million isn't being used for care. Also, Wexford's incentive is not incentivized under the contract. It's a long contract, but they're simply not incentivized to provide care. There's no criteria for quality of care. And so they hire the well, if you really want, I could give you a list of the doctors and you could look up their very checkered histories. But let's say very few of them were successful in private practice. It isn't likely that you would want to engage them if you had any choice. And that applies on both sides. It applies on the mental health side and the physical health side. So they have this contractor. And the contractor in his contract has an amazing, always blew my mind, amazing provision. They're supposed to provide X number of mental health care workers, physical health care workers, and so on. And they're paid each month as though they were providing that number of people. Even though over the course of the contract, they have never provided the number of people they were supposed to provide. And in many instances, they were at 50 or 60%, but they still got paid for 100%. Now you say, well, there must be something else to that, Mr. Hirshman. They're just not going to do that. And there is. There's supposed to be a true up every 4 months. So they only get an advance for 4 months, and then they're supposed to have to give some of that back. That's still a pretty screwy contract, and one that I would certainly enjoy having with most anybody. I get all the money, and then we handle about how much I have to give back. And that is the way the contract has worked. And so as a consequence, there aren't enough bodies even now to meet what Fred Cohn said was necessary way back in 2011. But there's a worse problem, and it applies both on the physical health side and the mental health side. And that is the quality of the facilities, not for the prisoners. that's awful. But for the people who work with the prisoner. And when we were up in the Court of Appeals, one of the things that we talked about was this turnover problem. There's a vast amount of turnover. And obviously, turnover destroys relationships, and it requires new training. And it's bad for any system that has a high turnover. And so an expert was hired, and she came back and she said, well, the one of the major problems with mental health care workers was that they had no desk space, no computers, and they became very frustrated and quit over this. And the state said, we'll solve that problem. We'll bring in trailers and make them into office space for each of the prisoners. And we said, that sounds like a smart idea. To this day, there are no trailers anywhere. And CGL, the company that estimated the deferred maintenance, one of its suggestions is trailers for staff. I couldn't agree more. On the other hand, my own experience with them is, and by them I mean the IDOC, is that they will promise most anything, but their delivery on those promises is painfully inadequate. Okay, let's talk about physical health. There was another class action called Lippert, and that class action was settled in 2017. 2017? No, 2018. And that class action settlement was very specific. There were general things. We were going to have adequate health care, the state promised. We were going to have electronic medical records. The system still works on paper records. Leaving aside the problems that paper records always present, handwriting and things like that. Wexford, who was responsible for storing the records, had failed for years to store the records properly. So when I had a client, I just tried a case for him, and he had been sent out for some tests because he had AFib fibrillation. It so happened when they were doing the AFib test that they noted a number of tumors that he had, and they biopsied them. At that point, they were benign. But the system, the experts from outside, the doctors from the hospital, sent a report back to the IDOC to say, look, this is a guy who has been a smoker, and he should have a CT scan every 6 months to see what is happening with the tumors that we identified, which are benign today. That report was just misfiled. And the record of serious illnesses, which is supposed to be in every prisoner's health file, didn't label or list the fact that he had been sent out, that he had been diagnosed with AFib, and that he was supposed to be seen on a regular basis to make sure that his tumors didn't develop into cancer. So if you looked in his file, you wouldn't see that on the problem list. You wouldn't find the written recommendation from the outsiders. And so when he came in December of 16, reporting all kinds of symptoms which are consistent with lung cancer, the doctor treated him for a cold. The next month, when he complained of terrible pain in his rib and they x-rayed his rib, they found he had a broken rib. The doctor said, oh, that must come from coughing. Every medical expert, even the defendant's medical expert, said, you don't break a rib by coughing unless your ribs have already been weakened by something else. In his case, cancer. So one of the things that we wanted in the Lippert settlement was finally to have electronic medical records. And the state agreed. Yes, we'll have electronic medical records. We'll have a contract to provide for electronic medical records in 2 years. And by year 3 of the settlement, we will finally have electronic medical records. There are no electronic medical records in the system except for Logan, the women's health facility, the women's prison, I'm sorry, also the women's health facility. Every other prison still has written records. Well, what about the contract? Didn't they just say that they would have a contract in 2 years in writing? Didn't they promise that? Yeah, they did. And they reported to the court that they had such a contract. And then they immediately canceled it. So we had to go to court and hold them in contempt for failing to have a written contract and a delivery date for electronic medical records. Then earlier this year, the time for them to have a contract after the contempt was March 30th. On March 29th, they signed a contract. They still obviously don't have electronic medical records. And so we're keeping our fingers crossed that they will finally actually fulfill this contract, and in a year or two, that is to say 5 years after they should have, they will have electronic medical records. Now, it's particularly important given the number of prisoners, 29,000, that you have a system where you can see what is happening, where you can manage your system. And I think, I don't know whether we have any doctors on this Zoom or not, but there aren't very many medical offices, hospitals in this country that today don't have records. Electronic medical records are not going to be a substitute for good doctors and good nurses, but they at least will permit an understanding of a patient's history without having to work through the incredible scrawls that constitute medical records. And unfortunately, the Lippert settlement, not unfortunately, fortunately, the Lippert settlement called for expert monitoring of the quality of health care. And despite the state's promise that they would deliver adequate health care, the monitors issued their, just about to issue, I guess, their 8th report. But the first 7 said they have not fulfilled any of the commitments they made with respect to the changes in the system necessary, and promised. So, I see that I've already gone 45 minutes and I did want to be able to answer questions. To my mind, this is a very sad story because the only people in the country who are guaranteed medical care because of Supreme Court decisions about cruel and unusual punishment are prisoners. And if the Illinois system, and the Illinois system is an example, despite the constitutional guarantee, despite lawsuits, despite written promises by the state, in our name, people are being incarcerated and they are getting horrendous mental health care, physical health care, and I haven't talked about dental care, but it's no different. So with a Democratic governor, I'm afraid, and I believe that the problem of what is happening in the prisons with respect to mental and physical health care is that no one wants to be accused of coddling criminals. And so we let prisoners who are on the upper floor of Dixon lie in their own feces for days because there's no one to change their diaper. We expect them to feed themselves because we don't have a nursing home. By the way, CGL, one of its recommendations about how the state should spend money is to create a nursing home for aged prisoners. One might also suggest that however horrendous the crimes, that people who are in their 60s and 70s, and they are pretty horrendous, they are not in a position to do much harm to society. And it would make sense to think about how best to deal with the elderly, the infirm, and those with, serious dementia, instead of leaving them to the care, sometimes quite good care, of other prisoners. It is apparently a premise. One of the things I once suggested was that prisoners be trained to help other prisoners. I was told that's unethical, but that is what is happening often in the prisons today. But these are people who haven't been trained in even the basic helping skills. So please, I haven't been looking at the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions. And anybody who wants the article I wrote on the first 12 years of Rasho, just send me an email and I'll send it back to you. It's my personal email is hbuper@gmail. What we are doing very shortly is putting all of the information we have that we've garnered in the 14 years of Rasho on the internet, so that citizens can look and see what the monitors have reported, what the system looks like. I will simply close with our expert report on the mental health system. And what she says, and she's spent her life looking at mental health care in prisons, is that she has a great deal of difficulty sleeping at night when she thinks about what she has seen in the Illinois system. And thank you for listening to me and paying some attention. I wish that I could forgive, but so far I can't. Mike, how do we do this? Do we not do it? Yeah, I will repeat my email. It's hbuper@gmail.
Do we have any questions, Mike, in the chat that Harold could entertain first, or we could go to questions other than the chat?
No questions in the chat currently, but this is a fine time to open it up. Just for everyone's benefit, I will post Mr. Hirschman's email in chat in just a moment. But if anyone does have any questions, please do raise your hand. Gary, you have a question? Thank you.
Till March, and he's now been transferred to Reed. But getting him out of there and getting him into someplace where he can live, even though he can afford to pay rent, is no easy task. And this is a person who, at least the way we look at things, didn't commit a crime volitionally. He was mentally ill at the time, and his mental illness is in remission. And there's no, well, we'll hope that next year we'll see a place for him. But if you've been convicted of a sex crime or put on a registry, that goes with you, and there are places you can't live and places you can't be at. And I really don't believe, and I don't think that there's statistical evidence that that kind of black mark, which lasts a lifetime, actually is good for society. It certainly isn't good for the individuals. I don't really believe that it cuts down on crime. One of my least favorite things to do is to look at a website called Hey Jackass, which actually started in Chicago. And what Hey Jackass does is it looks at the number of murders and gunshot crimes that happen in Illinois every month, and then obviously totals up the years. And the reason it's distressing, it's distressing because Illinois lately has been averaging about 900 murders a year, whom 80% of the victims are African American. But the really depressing thing is, okay, so there's 800 murders. That means there's 800 murderers. So how many of them are prosecuted every year? And that is generally around 20%. So if you think about that, over a course of 10 years. That means there are probably about 6,000 or so murderers walking the streets. And we think that's okay. But we think if somebody did something and actually went to prison and did their sentence and came out, we should stigmatize them when we won't even go after the murderers who are walking the streets. There's something fundamental with the way we look at these things, in my book.
Jeremy, I think you had a question.
Jeremy, you're on mute.
Cancer that I talked about actually is still alive. And he did ultimately get treatment for the cancer. It was at stage 4 at that point. But you know, they sent him out to the University of Illinois and they gave him the right
Jeremy, thank you so much for your, as always, beautifully principled articulation. I really appreciate you. We're going to move on. We have some more questions. The first one's in chat. This is from James Heinemeyer, who I think wants me to read it to you, Mr. Hirshman. What impact do you speculate will the Biden administration's mandate have for private insurance companies to provide mental health care the same way that physical health care is provided? The Fed has had requirements since 2008, and we recognize the inadequacy.
Well, I'll tell you, I think one of the great possibilities with respect to mental health care is the ability to use telemedicine. And I do think that, you know, having the ability to use private insurance to help defray the cost is obviously enormously beneficial. I'm not an expert on how the administrative mandates work with respect to that, but I do know that, for instance, in England, they have put in a program where everybody on their national health system can, who is feeling depressed, pick up the phone and call and get counseling. And the initial reviews of that are enormously positive. Obviously, we don't have that. They don't have it in the prison system, but it seems to me that that's something that, because it's often difficult to find help when you need it, that's something that also insurance companies might think is a very useful thing to subsidize.
Thank you, Mr. Hirshman. And I did have a question from Nancy Dangerfield.
You know, I didn't have the time to try to dig out the data, and it's pretty obscure about how much is actually spent per prisoner on medical and mental health care. That used to be a publicly available number that was collected by one of the foundations, but it isn't anymore. And so I don't know who knows the answer to that. And doing that, they abolished the $5 a visit charge a few maybe 10 years ago.
All right, and we have in chat, people have been waiting some time. Mike Lemberger asked, how much does qualified immunity protect the negligent in the Illinois prison system?
Very little, because the issues of delivering either physical or mental health care are settled law. And so, um, uh, qualified immunity very rarely comes into it.
Okay, thank you. And we have Diana Fine asked a question in chat, and then Melly, I'll get to you. Thank you for your patience. A family member who was incarcerated in a federal prison had requested the COVID vaccine. He was told they don't have any vaccine available. Can anything be done to rectify this?
Um, and for the Illinois prisoners, we sued in the Lippert case. We used the Lippert case as a vehicle to be sure that the COVID vaccine was available. There was a very significant effort on the part of, first of all, the governor stood up and made sure that that prisoners counted high when back in the days when it was difficult to get the vaccine. And interestingly, about 75% of the prisoners were vaccinated, but only about 45% of the guards wanted to be vaccinated, even though they were entitled to priority. I'm shocked that the vaccine is not available in the federal prison system. There's something funny about that. I just, that doesn't seem plausible to me. But, maybe they're special facts. The governor did a great thing, I think, for the health of the prisoners when he shut the prisons. Oh God, I guess it's March of 19. And that kept people. What that meant was that the people in the jails didn't come into the prisons, and it meant that they were more protected from COVID. Unfortunately, there was a huge outbreak with 20 deaths, I think, at Stateville shortly thereafter. But otherwise, for the first 4 or 5 months of the COVID situation, the prisons were closed, and that kept the number of illnesses and deaths down.
Yes,
And
thank you so much, Mr. Hirschman. As a returned federal guest of the federal government myself, I can say that one way to hold federal prison accountable for things, if it's a matter of, not a huge systemic change, but just providing a basic resource, is hold the warden accountable. Write him or her a letter and inform your congressperson. The one thing that they cannot stand is exposure to the public. So being an advocate in that way is tremendously helpful to inmates in the federal system.
might think about doing is writing the judge and writing your your state representative and saying, that he hasn't gotten a fair hearing on and why in what is this Cook County?
Yes, he's
Um,
in Cook County.
okay, so there's supposed to be bail reform, and there's supposed to be not keeping people in if they don't have to. Obviously, I don't know the details, but I would write also the chief judge of the criminal division and say that your son didn't get the right kind of hearing and that he's not really able to represent himself, and what can you do to help, and can you appear for him or something. Google, look up Circuit Court of Cook County Criminal Division. It'll give you the name of the chief judge.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschman. In addition, Melly, some good, knowledgeable, also knowledgeable people put some information in chat for you. I don't know if you're able to see that. about D3 from Melinda Murphy.
Okay, decriminalizing this,
If you
okay,
want me
so,
to, I can email that to you if you.
oh,
If you,
yes, could you please?
all right, please put your email directly into chat for me, and I will send it forward straight away.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, I forgot your name,
Mike.
Mike. Okay, so, I'll send it to you
Very good.
directly.
Thank you,
Thank
Millie. And
you.
I'm so sorry for your situation. And I think I can speak for everyone here when I say that we really feel for you and your situation with your son in the face of this large and uncaring system. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You see that there are a lot of people here, Melly, who have gone through similar things, a lot of people with very direct experience. I do want to get back to Mr. Hirschman,
Yes.
who's been very patiently waiting during this exchange. But please do avail yourself of the resources here. Please stay in touch with Abby and anyone at HINDA, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question or comment for Mr. Hirschman in our last 7 minutes? Well, Mr. Hirschman, I really want to thank you. If no one has anything else, we've had a very dynamic set of exchanges. You've provided some superb information with your direct lived experience involved in IDOC, with the state system, with the different impositions to that having to do with bureaucratic intransigence and kind of a culture of an entrenched culture of neglect. And you're fighting on behalf of human beings who are abused by that culture. And I want to thank you both as an individual, but also on behalf of Hindi Institute for the very important work that you are doing, have done, and I hope will continue to do.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you all.
Thank you. David, any final words?
No, I wanted just to personally thank Harold and hopefully that he would consider coming back next year for another engagement and to speak to our group again. I really enjoyed it. I think we all enjoyed it very, very much.
If you'll have me, I'm delighted to come back.
I know Rabbi Shimon would be thrilled to hear that as well. So great. Thank you. And
I
thank
only have
you.
one correction for you, David. You
Mhm.
said in my biography, I've been litigating for 48 years. Now it's 55.
Well, I wanted you to say that. Okay.
All
But
right.
anyway, thank you
you.
all. Thank you all very much. And thank you all for many of you here this evening attended all 3 sessions. Thank you all so much. And it was a pleasure having you all participating here. And I think we all made a great team together, asking great questions and being part of all of these discussions. And thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you next year as well. We'll have, again, a very good group of speakers, including, I hope, Harold, and we'll have another great year next year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Have a good evening, everybody.
I just want to wish everyone a good set of holidays if I don't see you until then. Thank you, Ms. Fine.